Hello, Rachael Johns.
Hello, Sophie Green.
How are you?
I'm actually feeling a bit sick, but apart from that, I'm good.
Well, we're in a non-date specific recording here because we are recording this before we officially start recording our season two, but we have a guest that we wanted to chat to. So we are going to do an update on what we're doing at the moment, but listeners, please be advised that you will likely be hearing this out of sequence. So what you're about to hear us say probably won't apply in the
No,
sequence.
hang on. I thought she said this, and now she's saying that. What the
So,
hell?
Rach, what have you been up to?
Well, as we're recording, I'm about to go to Adelaide in 2 days to go to the Romance Writers of Australia conference, and I'm the events manager for the Romance Writers of Australia conference. So basically, the last week has just been last minute RWA stuff. I handed in my edits. I think I was still editing last time we recorded. And when we recorded about your book. And I handed in my edits, and then so thankfully I'm between books now, and I'm having a purposeful break from writing or editing. And so yeah, I'm just reading, not catching up on all the jobs that I thought I would get done because you have this long list of things and the time just seems to disappear. So yeah, I'm kind of just in a in between zone at the moment. And yeah, that's what I've been up to. So nothing that exciting, but lots of thinking about the next book. And also, I submitted 2 proposals this week
Oh,
for
okay.
because my publisher was asking, the next book. So I submitted 2 proposals for what we're calling some red dirt rom-coms. So
Oh,
they're
yeah.
going to acquisitions next week. So fingers crossed.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to hearing more about your red dirt rom-com. Quite a genre. I love that genre. I've been on tour with Art Hour at Duchess Hotel. I've just come back from Queensland where I did a couple of events and visited a lot of bookshops. And I have done no writing because, as you
Well,
probably
that's fair enough. It's
it's
impossible. I find it.
impossible. It's impossible to write, not because I don't want to, but just the amount of energy that's required when you're
Yeah,
doing events and visiting bookshops. It's not conducive to then sitting
no.
down and writing
I'm
anything.
surprised when people say I saw Candice Fox had come across to WA a couple of months ago for the Mug River Writers Festival. And she was like, oh, I've just knocked off 2,000 words in my hotel room this morning. I'm like, geez, I'm lazy. But I'm like you. I just feel so exhausted. And my brain, it needs, I don't know, things are in compartments in my brain.
Yeah.
So I can't do promo and writing at the same time.
Yeah, I don't think you're at all lazy, Rachel. I think everyone would dispute that assessment. I think it is more that it's like it's compartments, it's a gear change, and I want to be able to give my full attention
Yeah.
to talking to people who have turned up to hear me talk about
Yeah.
Duchess Hotel. And if I gear change to the new novel, then I kind of feel like,
You
yeah,
might start talking about the new novel.
well, but it's just it's like there's a part of me that's still in that space. And
Yeah.
so working on my mantra, if I have enough time for everything, I'm just trusting that I have enough time to write
Yeah.
the novel.
Because how do you feel? Because I know that's one of the reasons why I said I'm between books now. Um, and I'm getting my edits back. My copy edits will be coming probably the end of next week or so, sort of as we're talking now, they'll be coming sort of mid to end of August. And I'm actually not going to start my new book until after I've submitted my copy edits. If they were any longer, I would have to because of you said that time thing. But like when you're writing 1 or 2 books a year, often you do have to jump between book, like from one book to another and then back to the other. And ideally, I would prefer not to do that. So is that sort of like you'd rather, just have a bit of a break completely rather than, not giving yourself fully to either in some way?
Yeah, I think it's just by necessity. But I do find myself daydreaming about the one I'm writing at the moment. So maybe
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is
that's
nice to
good.
have some time to
I
just,
think it can be.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer. You know how I'm very much that there's an element of magic in writing.
Yes.
And I feel and you're in terms of the time that you need to do will happen. I often think sometimes that, if you write at the right time for the right thing. So
Yeah.
like maybe, it's like when I'm stuck or whatever, I'm like, oh well maybe I just need a couple of days. And if it pushed on, it might not have been as magic as if you do get that, time, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also letting go of the idea that things need to happen in a certain way.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, well, if I'm going to sit down now, then I need to get this out and I need to devote this much time to it. It's like, no, it doesn't have to happen in the same way for every book
Yeah.
or for
So true.
the same chapter. You
Yeah.
can have one chapter where it's itty bitty bits and pieces all over the place, and another where
Yeah,
you have to
yeah.
take the whole chunk out.
Yes, so true.
So I think the moral of the story is let go of expectations as much as one can
Yes, and
around
be kind to yourself.
yeah. Yeah. If you want to be kind to yourself, Rach, what do you tend to do?
Tell myself that it's okay if I'm, not being as productive as I think I should be.
Yeah.
Basically it. Just it's a self-talk thing. It's like I can beat myself up about, being on tour and knowing that I've got a deadline and I need to write my book, or I can say, now's not the time. It's okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I'm trying to practice a lot more kindness to myself in the last few years.
Yeah, which is good. Now, I just thought of something. I saw you on Instagram with a pink top hat
Oh
and
yeah.
jacket. Would you like to tell us what that's about? And if you're listening to this podcast, Rachel's now put the pink top hat on. So you'll need
Actually
to go
not
to
the pink.
YouTube.
It's not the pink hat that was in the photo, unfortunately, because so my publishers for my rural, Harlequin, they bought me this pink hat when I was in Sydney, not this one, but one that looks very much similar to this one, and a bow tie. Because my next book, my rural romance, Outback Reunion, I'm just going to leave it in there, just covers my flat hair. Get my hair done tomorrow pre-conference, so it's not in its best shape at the moment. But yeah, my next book, Outback Reunion, is set it's partly set in a circus. So my publishers gave me this hat. Except not this one exactly. I'll explain why in a second. And we went to the grounds Alexandria because they had a circus theme going on in their display, and so we took some photos and stuff. Sadly, I left the hat on the plane.
Oh no.
Felt really guilty about that. So then tried to buy one that was almost exactly the same, but it's not exactly the same. It's not quite as good.
Oh, well, it looks pretty good.
I don't know if I should leave it on or not.
And anyone who's listening, yes, you'll have to go to the video to see what
I'm
it looks
going to
like.
leave it on. It's
'Cause it
hurting
is-
my hair actually a bit. I'm going to take it off and push my hair up.
That was a quick change of his mind. I'm leaving it on. No, I'm taking it
It's
off.
because I'm like, it gives me a bit of a headache, but my hair looks oily. Anyway, never mind.
Well, I have a big
yesterday, have
head,
we?
literally,
Oh, no.
so I don't tend to
Oh.
wear hats that often. So
No, even that's the same problem. That's why I was so excited about the hat that Harlequin gave me, because it actually fit my head really well.
well,
Never mind.
we love that. Now, Rach, our guest has arrived. So
Yay!
through the magic of the internet, I think I'm going to put us, well, not think I'm going to put us on pause. I am going to put us on pause.
Excellent.
And I'm going to let her in, and we'll see each other on the other side with an extra person.
Yay!
So, Rach, our special guest is here, and she is Lainie Anderson, whose second novel, The Death of Dora Black, will be out on the 28th of August. Hello, Lainie.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's
Thank you so
exciting.
much for joining us. I just
Thanks.
finished your book literally about half an hour ago because I didn't get my advanced reading copy. It went AWOL somewhere in the world. We don't know where. So someone's lucky enough probably to get a copy of your book. So I've been reading it on my Kindle because Sophie was kind enough to send it to me just a couple of days ago. So I literally just finished and I absolutely loved it. And I can't wait to hear all the questions Sophie's got because I'll probably butt in and ask a few.
And I absolutely love it as well. And we will find out more about it as I'm asking you questions. But I am going to tell the listeners a bit about you, Lainie, because you have quite an accomplished career. So you are a writer whose 35-year career in journalism and public relations includes 17 years as a columnist with Adelaide Sunday Mail, as well as stints at Melbourne's Herald Sun, London's The Times, and the South Australian Tourism Commission. After being awarded a Churchill Fellowship, Lainie published her debut novel, Long Flight Home, in 2019. In 2024, she completed a PhD, so she's Dr. Lainie, with the University of South Australia, researching the life of Kate Cox, who is the inspiration behind The Death of Dora Black. And in 2023, Lainie was announced as the Emerging Historian of the Year by the History Council of South Australia. So I have a degree in history as well. I love talking about history and I love talking about historical novels. And I'm especially going to enjoy talking about yours, Lainie, because it's fabulous. So I'm going to start
I don't have a degree in history, just putting my hand up. I'm the odd one out.
All right.
That's it, Rach.
Rachel. You can still be involved. You can
Still
be
allowed.
I'm feeling a little bit. I like reading historical fiction because I learn stuff. That's great.
Well, there you go. So, Lainie, you were a journalist for several years. When did you become an historian?
Well, you did mention Long Flight Home, which was my first novel, and really that sort of became a complete obsession for me. So I had a column in the Sunday Mail here in Adelaide for 17 years until last September. So I started that in 27. And in 2009, a Sunday Mail reader contacted me and said, Lainie, could you write a story on the old plane out at the airport? And that sort of led to like basically 10, 15 years of just getting obsessed with the story of the first flight across the world in 1919, which was achieved by 3 South Australians and a Victorian. And that just propelled me into history and learning all about it. And then getting really bloody angry that kids don't learn about South Australian history. And like that plane and the men on it achieved a feat that in its day was like man landing on the moon. And yet we all know Neil Armstrong, but we don't know Ross and Keith Smith, Wally Shires and Jim Bennett. So that sort of got me into history. And and now I just love finding little bits of South Australian history and working out how to weave it into fiction.
That's great.
And now over your shoulder, I can see something that says the greatest air race. Is that related to the book?
Yes. So when I was writing the novel, my gorgeous husband, Max, was editing it and throwing it back at me and saying, do this chapter again over and over. And then another girlfriend had a read of it, and she's amazing. She's a TV director and producer. And the 3 of us got together and co-produced a documentary which aired on SBS for the centenary of the air race in 2019, which is the same year as Long Flight Home came out. Yeah. So that's just, I'm so not into TV or anything like that, but I've co-produced a documentary for TV. So there you
That's
go.
Cool.
Congratulations. So that's the setup for how you became interested in historical stories. When did you first hear about Kate Cox? Well, actually, I should ask you to tell us, who was Kate Cox?
Yeah, good idea.
Okay, so Kate Cox was this incredible woman, a household name in South Australia in the first half of the 20th century. So at the age of 40, and she'd had quite a accomplished career in juvenile probation before that, but at the age of 40 in 1915, she became the first policewoman in the British Empire employed on the same salary as men and with the same powers of arrest. So it was, in its day, it was considered, a really progressive reform for South Australia. South Australians were really proud of it. It was sort of up there, talked about in the same terms as franchise for women. Women became, by a sleight of hand really, in Parliament, but women in South Australia were the first in the world to simultaneously get the right to vote and to run for Parliament. And this was up there with that, this world-leading policing reform. And she was born in Moonta to strictly Methodist parents. She was a teetotaler, but she dressed immaculately. She loved to shop. She was very had a very high sort of sense of moral. She wasn't moralistic, but she was certainly maternalistic. But she was all about, in her policing, she was all about prevention rather than locking women up. So not that she didn't lock people up, don't get me wrong. She, if you made the same mistake twice, you were not in her good books, but she did believe in a second chance. A third chance, most definitely not. So it was in the wake of the whole 2019 epic flight centenary and everything, when COVID had hit. My husband Max was a travel writer before COVID. I had been a journalist and had my columns halved. So we were twiddling our thumbs here in Adelaide. And Long Flight Home had introduced me to South Australian history and to that era. But I really wanted to find a story that wasn't male dominated and that let me explore Adelaide in that era, because obviously A Flight Across the World, it started with 4 men who'd been away at war. So they were all over in England or the Middle East and flying back. So the story was very international, even though they were South Australians and Australians. So it was lots of Australian history. And so I was like, as you do when you're bored, you scroll your mobile phone, and I was on Twitter and I saw this tweet that said, on this day, May 5, Kate Cox was born in Moonta. you know, became this groundbreaking policewoman, and I thought, there's my babe, there's my girl.
Yeah. That must have been so exciting when you.
It was like, it really was one of those aha moments, like, yeah, she's my girl. And you know how life sort of leads you in certain ways. I had a friend, a lovely man who was in marketing at the University of South Australia, where I'd done my degree in journalism back in the 80s, in the 1980s, when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And I went to see him and said, look, is there any way I could maybe become an adjunct to uni? Is there any sort of facility for that, so that maybe I could apply for grants or something? Because I really think this is a story that, you know, South Australians should hear and stuff. So I was just we had a coffee, and I was just trying to pick his brains about, you know, if there was any sort of avenue to do it through uni. And he goes, just do a PhD. And I went, I can't do a PhD. I haven't done my honours. I haven't been at uni since my 80s. He said, look, with your Churchill Fellowship, with your body of work, you might be okay. So just apply and have a crack. And now it's done. And I look back and think, wow, I've done a PhD. And it's been amazing. The last 3 years have just gone like that, and got a PhD, and the book's coming out. It's amazing.
And I should also ask about the Churchill Fellowship, because I don't know much about what that involves, and if it's attached to a particular strand of study or work.
Sophie, I'm so glad you did, because I'm now on the selection panel here in South Australia, and it is the most incredible institution here and across the Commonwealth. So it's basically a scholarship open to anyone in any field. Like, you could be an underwater basket weaver and want to go overseas to learn about underwater basket weaving and come back. And as long as you can show that it's not just about your own professional development, but that you have a plan to bring what you learn back to your wider community, then you can have a shot at winning a Churchill Fellowship. And the grants are amazing. They're usually about $20,000 to $25,000. In my case, I went to 7 weeks, 9 countries, retracing the route of the flight, and also went to, I was basically, sorry, I jump all over the place when I'm getting interviewed.
Right, so do I.
Not a great journey being interviewed. Anyway, so I first went to the Smithsonian because my sort of thing for my Churchill Fellowship was to build a business case for the Vickers Vimy by proving up the significance of the flight, therefore the plane, to try and get politicians to be interested in moving the plane. Because the plane, when I was growing up, and from the 1950s, always had pride of place outside the old airport terminal in South Australia. And when the terminal moved just down the road in Adelaide, just within the Adelaide airport precinct, suddenly this beautiful old hangar was in the long-term car park. So that's what the whole thing was, to try and get it moved. And it's now been moved. We ended up raising $7 million from state, federal governments and Adelaide Airport to get it moved into this beautiful new facility that Adelaide Airport has overseen, and they've just done the most beautiful job. So Churchill Fellowships, like you guys, anyone out there listening, anyone can have a go at it. You can be any age. You can be 18, you can be 70.
I found out about it this year because someone actually asked me to be a reference for their application. So I was like, oh wow, this looks great. Yeah.
They are mind-blowing, and they have such kudos in Australia and overseas. So basically what happened was, Winston Churchill, on his deathbed, the Duke of Edinburgh, old Prince Philip, went to see him on his deathbed and said, what do you want your legacy to be? And he said, I would like something like a Rhodes Scholarship, but for anyone in the Commonwealth. And so it was called, it had a funny name, which I can't think of, which is great. But anyway, the Sunday after his death, around the Commonwealth, they had this massive door-knocking appeal, and Australia raised more per capita even than England.
Wow.
So we have this massive, big, lovely amount of funding in perpetuity for people to be sent over. Over 100 get sent overseas every year from Australia.
Amazing. Yeah.
And so Yeah, and so that sounds like, the way the Miles Franklin works. In case people don't, Miles Franklin Award. In case people don't know, there are organisations that are entrusted to look after the funds for these prizes, which ensure that original bequest actually can keep providing. So partly what I love about that, also from an historian's point of view, is that there's an amount of money that was collected just after Churchill died, and essentially that still exists, and it's just grown, and it continues to have this impact so many years later, just as Miles Franklin's bequest did, and still does all these years later. So yeah, it's a living history, in some ways.
Yeah, and people just go away, and the doors that open up to you because you're a Churchill Fellow, and because you're on a Churchill Fellowship. And people might go, I've heard of people who'll go to, say, Chicago, and the people that they meet there, and it might be about social work or something, and they'll go, oh, you need to go to see these people in Seattle, and they just get on a plane and take them there. And it's just,
wow,
people just, it's fantastic. The sense of family around it is really great. I love being a Churchill Fellow. It's one of the highlights of my life.
Well, I can certainly see the through line there from you doing that to writing your first novel, and obviously then going into study around Kate Cox. So I haven't done a PhD. I have done some university things, but I believe with a PhD you need a thesis. So what was your thesis around Kate in particular?
So mine was actually a creative artifact PhD, which is basically you have a creative artifact and then a smaller exegesis. So it's an artifact exegesis model as opposed to an 80,000 word thesis.
Mm-hmm.
So I had an 80,000 word novel, and then I actually had about a 28,000 word exegesis, which sat beside it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the actual thesis side of it was exploring how a work of popular murder mystery could still do justice to a significant, complex person in history.
Right.
So it was basically how I strove to stay true to Kate Cox as a person, even though I was fictionalizing her life. And really, I've ultimately said it's not about Kate Cox. It's inspired by her life, and I use her name because I want people to know who she is. That the whole reason for writing a murder mystery was to make history incredibly accessible, as opposed to a bio. I did have a choice. The first 6 months of a PhD, which I didn't realize when I went in, is a literature review. So you look at everything that's ever been written about her.
Wow.
And then also other fields of study, other avenues that you might be able to use in literature and history, and other ways that I could have brought her life back for modern audiences. And it might have been a stage play, it might have been a documentary, it might have been a biography or speculative biography, which is massive now, and there's some South Australian women who do great things with that. But I decided to just leapfrog everything and go straight into, because she's a policewoman, it was sitting there begging to be written a murder mystery about.
I was going to say, have you ever thought about writing crime before?
No, I'd never even really thought about writing until I got back from my Churchill Fellowship, and I thought I would write a biography about Ross Smith, and then thought, why would I do that when there's already been biographies written about his life? When I'm not even into aviation or technology or anything. So why not just write this rollicking story about his life? And that's ultimately what I wanted to do with Kate Cox as well, just to try and get as many people learning history through her, because she's a window into early 20th century Adelaide, and in particular women who are so unsung in World War One, the World War One story, rightly so, because 60,000 beautiful young Australian men lost their lives. But we don't celebrate the role that women played back home.
I love it. I loved it. I was going to say, I really liked, because I did learn something. I never heard of Kate Cox, before, and the women's police and all that. And it's a bit similar to my friend Anthea Hodgson, who wrote a story about the nurse on Banker Island, and I'd never heard that story. It's been written since by a few people this last year, but she wanted to do exactly the same as you, and to write a book that people would read that may not read a biography or may not read history, so that could spread the word about these brilliant women. And so I think it's great.
Yeah,
Well,
because ultimately, sorry,
no,
Sophie,
you go.
ultimately I just, because her life was really rich, and there were certainly various levels of service, and it could very easily be a biography, and I welcome anyone to have a go at doing it. But I just thought people who actually already know her name don't, I'd only be speaking to them. They're probably the only ones who would buy a biography anyway on a South Australian woman, So I just thought, let's just make it really a good, fun, accessible read, and try and jam as much history in without it being like getting knocked over the head by Mr. Exposition while you're reading it. Hopefully.
Big decision to
Well,
make.
you've absolutely achieved that, and also the phrase 3 feet apart is going to live in my mind forever, and people can read the novel to find out what that is. I'm not telling them.
That was funny.
So when you were coming up with the idea for the novel, did you actually, so you obviously, it sounds like you set out to write this murder mystery, but then the storyline of the death of Dora Black, was that something that you actually had to spend some time pondering and custom making it for the Kate Cox character, or was it actually a storyline that developed as you were sort of making notes and preparing?
The various sort of elements of it, a young woman, and it's right, the very first sort of chapter is someone washing up on a beach, so I'm not spoiling anything there, but it's sort of true to an extent about what did happen, like young women sadly did take their own lives off the Glenelg jetty, off bridges in Adelaide. But Kate Cox sort of cracking great little crimes, but she wasn't a detective. The women were basically at constable level, even though after the 1920s, she was in charge of the women's police branch for 20 years in South Australia. So she started in 1950. In the 1920s, women from the women's police branch did work on all cases, complex crimes involving women and children. They did the questioning and you're helping with the women and children involved in these cases. But she wasn't in charge of doing any big complex murder inquiries. So I created a murder mystery narrative arc that could sustain a whole novel. And then what I did as part of my whole, aim of doing justice to her as a complex character, I wove some of her real life cases in amongst the murder mystery. So there's always little crimes going on. You'll know when people read it, and you'll go, oh wow, was that true? Did she really do that? And mostly she did, in the smaller things that happen along the way.
Well, and also what comes through is the preventative role that she and the women police had, was that their job was, yes, they weren't allowed to be detectives, they weren't allowed to do the same sorts of things that the men were doing, but they were seen as being very important in preserving the sanctity of the lives of women and children. And I actually really quite like that angle. It's like an acknowledgement that these women and children were incredibly important, and in a time of war, that it was not just, oh, it's about the men at the front. It was actually, well, the women and children at home do need to be looked after. And if the paternalistic state can't really do it, particularly when they're distracted by war, then we're going to assign it to this woman, Kate Cox, and anyone who's working with her to do it. And so it was really interesting mode of policing. I have a background in law. I did a law degree. And so I found that angle really fascinating as well, that there was a policing model within that I was looking at thinking, is there something we could actually draw through to today in terms of what she was doing?
Wow.
They really did have a social worker role back then. They were, like, their job literally was to police immorality.
And I was surprised that was like the domestic violence angle, it was actually acknowledged, kind of thing, a little bit,
Yeah. And because she carried a 5-foot cane, and which today, and I mean, imagine getting with your beautiful boyfriend down on Elder Park in Adelaide and getting whacked with her 5-foot cane. It just would have been mortifying and maddening, and you would have absolutely hated her. Like, she was called everybody's friend, but I don't think some of the younger women at Adelaide would have agreed with that. But it was in a time when like 50% of babies born were conceived outside of marriage. So, but and birth control wasn't, you know, the only sure way of achieving birth control was abstinence.
Yeah.
So that 5 foot cane was really her only way of stopping young women from getting themselves in, and pregnancy outside of wedlock. Then the stigma was so dire.
Yeah.
And young women often had no avenues. Even if the man said it's not my baby, then there was no avenues to. They were on their own. So she was very, very much about prevention, and so.
Well, and also the fact that, I mean, childbirth is still dangerous, which we can forget, but it is. But back then, even more dangerous. So it was partly about the moral side of it, it seemed to me, but also about the life-preserving side of it, which is if you get pregnant, there's a chance you're going to die. Like this is a violent act and very precarious.
And if you end up with a man that you don't really know as well, women were in. I look at it like it was my Adelaide. Lots of the buildings are still here, but it was almost like a different country in terms of the law and the social aspects and the rights of women. So it was only in 1914, so 3 years before I've set my book in summer of 1917, only 3 years earlier, women could legally become or take care of their children when their husbands died. Like, so, you know, like they weren't automatically given custody of their children before 1914.
Oh.
So women were really, even still in 1917, women were the property of their husbands until they were the property of the property of their fathers, and then they became the property of their husbands. Women, they didn't automatically have a right to divorce for even if their husbands were having an affair. That couldn't be used as grounds for a divorce. But men could, if their wives were having an affair, that was grounds for men to divorce.
Yeah.
So custody rights to money, there was none of that. So the women police were all about trying to make sure young women didn't get themselves into a situation where, heaven forbid, they were having a baby not being married, but secondly, getting themselves into a marriage that was not safe and miserable and then had no rights.
Lainie, you're talking to two people who are the products of affairs. Rach and I are both the products of affairs, so we totally understand about being born outside of wedlock.
Yeah,
wow.
And the consequences.
How did you find that out? How does that come up in conversation?
Well, I'm adopted.
How did we find out though? I don't actually know. Like,
About each other.
I think our first chat. Oh, maybe you listened to me talk. I don't know. No,
That's right. Yes, Rachel mentioned it at an event in Sydney, and by then we'd already recorded an episode of the podcast, and she just happened to say something at this event about being the product of an affair, and I said, "Oh, gee, so am I." So
quite different, like circumstances that unravelled after that, and we talked about it on a whole podcast about
it. Except both of our biological fathers were married men. Yeah. So
the rest of the issues are quite the story is quite different, but it was interesting.
Pops would have had something to say about that.
She would have. Yes, the claim might have come out on both of our sets of parents, and if it had, we may not be here.
So we do, I guess, read those sort of books and stuff. We think about those sort of things,
Now,
in creating,
Lainie had a question. Did you, Lainie? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that the other thing that was happening, and Sophie alluded to it before, was that in World War I, it was a time of, around the world, rapidly increasing freedoms for women, because lots of businesses in Australia that were trying to not even gently encourage men into enlisting, they were disincentivising roles for men and giving women the jobs. So women suddenly, even before the outset of war, 30% of women in work were domestic service workers, and yet suddenly they were finding themselves, maybe at the telephone exchange, or more of them were teachers or working in shops and having so much more money and so much more freedom. And there was basically a global moral panic about the increasing freedom of young women, but also of young boys who suddenly didn't have fathers or male role models because they were all at war. Yeah, so that's another reason why the women police played such an important role.
Yeah, and look, you've woven in all of that detail so deftly that at no time does it ever feel heavy-handed. I never felt like you were giving us information to tell us. It would follow that golden rule of give the reader what they need to know at the exact time they need to know and no more. Like it's so beautifully done. So anyone who's listening to this, if you're not already convinced to read this novel, please go and do it. I am going to talk about your writing process because a lot of people listening will be interested in that. But before we get to that, Lainie, I'd like to ask about Kate's Offsider, who is a fictional character.
I wanted to know about that too.
So you have Ethel Bromley, who did not exist in reality, and you have made this, this book is about a detective duo. It's not just about Kate. So when did you get the idea to come up with her?
So Ethel I bloody love Ethel. So the women in real life, they did learn jiu-jitsu and to protect themselves. I know. All of the police in South Australia, they learned jiu-jitsu to protect themselves on the streets. And they learnt first aid, but they had to teach themselves the law. And I just love that. Just how crazy that sounds. But I invented Ethel again as part of my aim to do justice to Kate Cox. So even though I invented her so that there was yin and yang in the book, I'll just step back one step. In real life, Kate Cox when she started, she was asked, would you like 6 women constables? And she said, no, give me 1 because I don't even know what I'm going to do yet. And a woman called Annie Ross, who was an incredibly passionate, hardworking, religious woman as well, started with her. And then within about 6 months, they had a third because they were just swamped. The women of Adelaide just was a deluge of women basically wanting advice and counsel and stuff. And their role was really quite massive. They worked 60-hour weeks. They had 1 Sunday off every 6 weeks. Like, this was massive, these women. They were just incredible. So but in reality, Annie Ross would have been so much like Kate Cox, and it just wouldn't have been an entertaining read. But also, I created Ethel almost like us. So she is us, and she's progressive, she's sassy, she's, bombastic. She never walks through a door when she can barge through it.
I love that description.
She's always speaking her mind and getting in trouble, and I just love her. But I want you to meet Kate Cox through and as Ethel as a conduit, so that you're meeting her with someone who is absolutely loyal and adores her, but actually is more like us in her, she's a bit sexually explorative. She likes a tipple. Her parents are very wealthy, so she likes a drink because she's, been brought up by this gaggle of women and her mother's friends.
Of the aunties.
The aunties, yeah. And it's all so that you meet Kate Cox through without my 21st century judgment. You're just meeting her through someone who loves her and doesn't always agree with her, but you just hear what Kate Cox has got to say, and then we move on. It's not like I'm sort of going, I didn't like her, the way she said that, or what. You just hear it and off we go. That she doesn't believe in birth control. Okay, good, righto, let's move on. So that was Ethel's. The reasoning behind Ethel, and also just to have fun. She's such a sassy, gorgeous thing, and she just loves Kate, and she's trying to be a good policewoman, but they're learning on the job, really, aren't they?
Yeah. So in terms of character development for these two, Kate, obviously you're drawing from an historical figure. There's quite a lot of detail, but you still need to make her into a character that you can put into a story. But was it a similar process to how you developed Ethel, or did you essentially go through almost like a quasi research process into Ethel, thinking, who is this person? I'm going to construct her. I'm going to make sure I have as much detail as, or not as much, but quite a bit of detail about her before I start writing the two of them into a story.
The interesting thing with the PhD, and also sort of partway through my PhD, or in my third year, I met Melanie Ostel from Melanie Ostel Literary, who became my agent, who was incredible. So I did, Kate, I just had this massive, before I started writing one word, I had a beautiful character outline of her, which was like about 20 pages long, about everything I knew about her, her family background, all of that. So that was there from the get-go, and I just would keep referring back to it. And with Ethel, it was much more, she started, I think, in probably the earlier drafts, she was a much more one-dimensional character. And as we came, I kept, like, my PhD supervisors, and I had this amazing team, including Nicholas Jost, who's a beautiful fiction writer, and he helped me a lot with my fiction. As the story develops, and I wrote different chapters into it, Ethel's became a much more fully formed character. Even like right towards the end, before it came to Hachette, I was still putting in little bits about Ethel's background that made her the much richer character that you see. Yeah.
How long did it take you to write it? Sorry.
Well, I mean, because I was doing the PhD alongside it, it was probably in total about 14 months, but, you know, it was really the full life, the 3 years that it took me to do the PhD. I was tinkering with it and going away and doing my exegesis and coming back to it. And it's such a labour of love. I'm writing book 2 now. I'm sort of about 3/4 of the way through it, and I love being back with them. It's great.
I was wondering, because Sophie mentioned at the beginning, she's looking forward to book 2, and I was wondering, is it a series? Are we seeing more of Kate and Ethel?
Yes, definitely.
Excellent.
Definitely. Yes, I've got a 2-book deal with Hachette, and hopefully they'll have me back for 3. We'll just see how everything goes. But I'm thrilled to be bringing a second book back, and I'm looking over my computer as I say it, because I've got this wall of Post-it notes of the different chapters, which I didn't do for the first one, but I sort of myself. Yeah, I got myself in a bit of a bind I thought I was almost finished, and then realised no, it's just hasn't got enough depth. So I've moved everything around, and we're going again.
Well, you very neatly led us into talking about your writing process there by making the Post-it notes. So is this is that how you're charting the story, that you're moving Post-it notes around? Yes,
so I do start with I start with a big piece of paper, and I just start putting in potential scenarios or chapters that are maybe inspired by real life. This one, the second novel, has got much more fiction to it. The first one, I had Kate Cox's real life cases that I really wanted to get in there, and they had to help. Obviously, every chapter you have to take the story further, but so I'm not one of these amazing people like Michael Robotham who just starts writing and off you go, and your characters tell you what they're going to do. I cannot do that. I mean, maybe one day maybe when I grow up as a crime writer, I might be able to do it.
And also, he's been doing it a while, Lainie. So he's
maybe when she grows up.
20th novel and all that. I mean, he's outstanding. But I have a very comprehensive chapter outline before I start writing, so that I feel really confident.
See, that impresses me, because I wish I could do that, but I just can't.
Really?
Yeah. No.
Okay. I think particularly with crime, because you need to. There's so much going on. There's so much going on with crime, like, because there has to be like the 2 women, they have to develop their own character arcs, and then you've got to obviously the murder has to.
You've got to have the red herrings and things like that.
Got to have your red herrings
and the actual clues. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, I want to like have South Australian history like zinging away, and people going, oh wow, that's what used to be there, or oh okay, that's because the second one's I've always like harbored this love of art history, and if I had my time over, maybe I'd have been an art historian and done curation and stuff. So the second one is set in the art. There's a murder right at the outset in the art gallery on North Terrace, and North Terrace is just this beautiful cultural boulevard here in Adelaide. And so I'm loving it, but there's just so much to try and get in deftly. And if I didn't have a chapter outline, man, I'd be lost.
I am always amazed when crime writers say that they don't plan a book at all, and they throw a murder in at the beginning or a kidnapping, and then they just go for it, and they have no idea who is going to, who did the deed. I am always impressed by that.
They also say because, if there's not sort of 5 ways it could possibly finish, then someone, might be able to know how it's going to finish at a particular time of the book. And I look forward to maybe one day being able to do that. But
so how did you work out? I mean, with your planning process, sorry, so like you say you planned. So like what came first, and how did you, like, did the crime come first, and then you worked out, well, who could possibly be responsible and why, or how did you go about like working out what was going to happen and how?
I know pretty much straight away what my crime is, who did it, and then it's a matter of weaving in how I want to bamboozle everyone in the process. That's the real that's actually, I haven't actually articulated that before, but the journey for me is the bamboozling.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
Well, Lainie, I have to tell you that worked.
Yeah.
It really worked.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And it is hard though, because you start with this sort of like weird sort of idea over here, but at the end you have to almost know what, absolutely every element of the murder, how it took place, what the murderer had for breakfast that morning, almost everything, to make it concrete on the page and to not sort of go be meh. And that's something I'm learning as well. Like, I really do feel like I'm a toddler with like training wheels. Like, so I'm so glad that people have and that you two have loved the book, because I mean, one of the reasons I really threw myself into the PhD as well is that I knew that I would just get the most amazing mentoring from my supervisors at UniSA. So to take me that next level, because Long Flight Home really was, it was just me wanting to write a book, and I'm really proud of it. But it's this one, I really feel like I had the right people telling me, and then Melanie Austell just took it another level for me. Told me to get rid of 8,000 words and put another 8,000 in, and she was great.
Because you have to be able to do that. That's the other thing, is it's one thing to get that kind of advice, it's another to be able to do it. And sometimes when authors say, or writers who haven't yet been published say, should I pay a freelance editor to do a structural report, I tend to say to them, only if you know what to do with it, because it's a particular skill. Right. So I'm curious, therefore, about the editorial process in general for you, because obviously Melanie gave you some advice. You're working on the PhD. By the time it got to Hachette, was there much of an editorial process? Because it sounds like it was pretty much cooked at that stage.
I don't know whether they'll want me to say, but it was basically, I did, I think, a morning, maybe half a day's rewriting. Right. It was obviously you have to read the whole book, and there's little tiny little comments and things, but really it was what you're seeing is, I would say, like 98% what Hachette handed. Yeah, which was really great. And I mean, Rebecca Saunders, just so fantastic. I just love her so much. I'm so incredibly fortunate.
So is your publisher, we should mention, Rebecca.
My publisher, at Hachette, and just having her confidence in it, she fell in love with it as much as I loved writing it. And where she said, it's really funny, you know, because you can read a book that you've written like 20 times, and until someone says, it just felt like there was a little beat missing there, and you'll go, yeah, me too, but you've read it 20 times and not changed it.
Yeah.
And she was perfect at that. She just had a real deft hand at, can you just have a little think about that, or maybe where she says that. And it did get, you know, obviously it gets micro towards the end. But I have a mega disease to please. You can probably tell that about me, the way I gabble on. But when people tell me to do things, and I'm in awe of everyone that I've been working with throughout the process of Dora Black. When people said change it, it was very rare, maybe 5%, where I really said, no way, there's a line in the sand and I'm not crossing it there. I'm dying in the ditch. But most of the time I was like, yeah, okay, I see why you're saying that. And okay, that's something I've learnt. And particularly if you'd seen the first draft, it was really exposition, lots of history, where you see maybe 2 sentences about the history of the morgue, the Adelaide City morgue. There was probably 20 sentences in the first draft. And that's the thing with history as well, because I think it was Stephen King who said, you've got to know absolutely everything, every fact when it comes to history, and then you've got to forget it. Yeah. So the art is in the forgetting, but making sure the reader still gets a sense of it.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
I feel that the Adelaide of that time was so vivid in that novel, and Kate and Ethel, there's even the secondary characters, we have this real sense of the color and movement of the time, and the stakes, the moral stakes, the political stakes, the war stakes, all very well established. So even though you said you're a toddler with training wheels, I frankly refute that. I've worked in publishing for a long time. Because I really think it's a fantastic piece of work. So my next question to you, Lainie, is how long do we have to wait for the next one? Will it be out next year?
Oh,
so it will be out next year. I think it might even be in the back of the book, which is down there. Hopefully by September, certainly by the end of next year. Definitely.
Fabulous.
Awesome.
Definitely.
And have you started writing number 3?
No, but I'm certainly thinking about it. 3 through 10.
Yeah.
Ashley, if you're listening.
Do you reckon how many, would you keep writing in this series for quite a few books if you could?
I definitely would, because there are so many great stories that throw a light on the women of World War One. And it's a pity that initially I had the book starting right at the end of World War One, and then I moved it to 1917 just to give myself a little bit more room. So the second book is only 6 months on from the first novel, because there's so much going on, and I wanted war to almost be ubiquitous, so I didn't have to speak about it all the time and constantly be explaining what was going on. So it's sort of there, like COVID sort of quickly became ubiquitous and everyone was just, knowing it was there. It's omnipresent, but it's not, I don't have to be writing about it all the time. But there's so many, even just one that's centered around the Red Cross and what the women, 14,000 parcels getting shipped from South Australia alone every month during the war.
Wow.
Women were knitting, they were baking, they were buttons, selling little buttons to raise money. I didn't even know that over in France, where the poor men were in those awful trenches, the Red Cross funded these little cafes, like little mobile coffee vans today, so that every man going onto shift or when he coming in and out of the trenches got a hot meal on the way in and on the way out. Women had who had a son or a husband or a brother, they actually had little service bars on their clothing as well. I didn't know. There's so much history that we just don't know, and I would just I'd love the opportunity to just keep exploring it and explaining it, and everyone to just feel like I know about that part of history. Because even here in Adelaide, we have you know, we're really proud of the fact we didn't have convicts, you know, in our.
Yeah, I love that line.
Oh yeah,
I
know.
did know that, so, but yeah, I enjoyed reading about that. Yeah.
But so we get lots of history up until, you know, in the 1800s. So we were settlers arrived in 1836. Obviously, our history goes back 60,000 years with our very rich Aboriginal history. But so we tend to get like this real sort of rich history in the 1800s, and then it sort of leapfrogs to Donald Dunstan doing amazing things in the late 60s. And there's this whole rich history that we don't explore in Adelaide, even amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, only people who are really passionate about history, which is great. And I've been so beautifully welcomed by the history community, and I love, you know, that little part of my life now. But yeah, there's just so much for people to learn. And the idea that I can maybe just get other people learning about South Australian history through these two incredible women is pretty exciting, really.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Well, you have absolutely done that, and we've had you talking for quite a long time, and I would like to encourage people to go and read the book, because if I keep asking you questions, Lainie, I'm likely to reveal things I don't wish to reveal. So I
was just going to say, have you got any writing tips for people who are writing their first book, since you, you know, this is your second, but, you know, you're saying like you just decided to go and write the book with your first, and then you went into a PhD. But did you learn any snippets along the way that you think aspiring writers might find useful?
Yeah, and I mean, they might all be cliches, but they're cliches for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. I need to hear them again.
I always say to myself, no one's ever going to read my first draft. So no matter how crap it's going to be, particularly if you're trying to write history and you're trying to write it in an accessible way, just tell yourself the story. That is the first job. And then no one ever has to look at it. So who cares if it's really bad? You know, the second you'll come back to it tomorrow, and you'll realize that there might be one sentence out of 10 that you like. So you start playing with that. So that's my first tip. The second one is along the same lines, which I always say to myself, and that is, and I stole this from someone, you can fix, and it might have been Jodie Picoult, so pardon me if I'm bastardising it, Jodie. You can fix a page of words, you can't fix a bad page.
Yeah. A blank page. Oh yeah.
Sorry, did I say that wrong?
Do you mean you can't fix a blank page?
No, you can fix a page of words, but you can't fix a blank page.
Yeah.
You said the blank page is just there's nothing there. There's nothing there to work on.
Yeah.
So and for me, I've always loved my literature, really. So I've just thrown myself into reading as much crime as I can. I think you've really got to be reading what you're writing.
I agree.
And trying to learn little, and sometimes if I'm feeling really stuck, I'll read, like, there's nothing like reading Kate Grenville, who's just the most beautiful writer, to make me feel like, okay, I don't be overwhelmed by her. Just read something and maybe, you know, she's just so evocative with her voices, and then that helps me to go, okay, maybe if I have, I'll start a chapter this way. And so just read as much as you can, and just I try and write every day as well. I'm not as good at that as some, you know, but yeah, just keep on going.
Yeah.
Yeah, practicing. You've got to practice the craft, really, to be good at it. Yeah. Yeah. And don't stress about it getting published either until, you know, until down the line. Just don't get too hung up on that.
Yeah, I've definitely said before, so when people are rushing to get published rather than, you know, taking the time on the book or to learn your craft. Yeah.
It is absolutely worth taking time. All great tips, Lainie. And I am going to wrap it up there and let you go.
I can't believe the time's gone already.
So quick.
So I didn't do the maintenance before we started recording, so I'm going to do this while we're recording and say I'm going to put the recording on pause, and then we'll say goodbye to you off air, and then Rachel and I will come back after that to talk about you in your absence. It will be only good things, FYI. So
thank you so much
for your time. It was wonderful to talk to you about this fantastic book.
I can't believe you've had me on. So thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
I'm very grateful. Have a great night. Bye-bye.
Next one.
Well, Rach, Lady was everything I could have hoped for and more. As someone who loves history, it was wonderful to hear her talking about the history side of things. I think that assuredness in her tone as she was talking about her research and about the writing absolutely reflected in the novel, because you
Totally agree.
From the start you are in very assured hands.
I agree. You can tell that she's very, very passionate about her subject and doing it for the right reasons. You know what I mean? Like, so it's not just, this kind of crime sort of cozy. We didn't actually talk about the fact that would you say it's a cozy crime? It's historical, kind of cozy, because it's got, I'd be interested to think what she said about that. But like, it is having a moment. I feel, this kind of book. The cover even shows it's similar to some of the, cozy crime books that are doing well internationally, but not the same, but it's got that bit of a Richard Osman sort of.
Yeah, it's got the signifiers. Yeah.
Some other ones are doing well. But I love that, she's obviously just found a story and was excited about writing the story. It was nothing to do with, maybe this is doing well, maybe I should write a crime book, Yeah.
So by the time this podcast comes out, or this episode comes out, the book probably will be out, because I like to time things so that people can go straight to or the music, if it's a music thing. So if you are listening to this and the book is out, please do yourself a favor, as Molly Meldrum would say. And Rach is going to do herself a favor and power down before her RWA conference.
Yes, not feeling very well, so I think I need a good early night and a rest.
So, Rach, I'm going to say bye to you, and we will catch our listeners next time.
Yes, see you next time.